work from OIG. Do I think this is good? I think it's TBD. That's the answer. But yes, this has become a huge moneymaker. Do we really want the people that are prescribing the medicine, the pharmacology, the actual medicine for treatment, to make money off of that medicine? Is that actually what we want? Because that's what these startups are doing. They're pill mills for ketamine. And so now you start thinking about the incentives. Hey, you get ketamine, you get ketamine. It's like Oprah. Everybody gets ketamine. And I think that's the problem.
Danish, what do you think about, as an example of that, the work on Glynac and NMN and MT and all of that, where it was everybody who was in the community was, of users when it was before it got, basically patented, and now it's going to be, made expensive essentially. Is
Yeah.
the same thing.
David Sinclair is about to make a lot of money. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, again, going back to the concept there has to be a separation of church and state there. Like the clinicians cannot be the ones that are making money from the medicine that they're prescribing. And there's a loophole, and this is maybe TMI, but what people don't realize, there's a loophole in America that you can set up that was copied from private equity firms, that allows these startups to set up separate entities and claim that there's that the clinical decision making is not being tied to money. It's called the MSOPC model for people that are nerds like me that are looking into it, and it's actually allowing these startups to overprescribe as part of their design. While I'm a complete believer that, one, there's a lot of opportunity, financial and also therapeutic opportunity, to go down these different pathways. And people might know I've been a very big proponent of some of these regimens for specific use cases like PTSD, and then with the NMN, I actually use it myself. So I've definitely been a proponent of it. I'm just like very scared about the incentives, because healthcare, we have to be very careful, because move fast, break things makes a ton of sense in tech, but like, you don't want to be doing that in healthcare. You also have to do first, do no harm. So it's like it's a real big challenge right now, and I'm really worried about some of these startups. I'm not going to name names, but there's definitely some that have been growing at an incredible pace, just because they're using the tool that you like doesn't mean that they're doing it correctly.
Very cool.
So I was going to say that speaks to the what you were describing is exactly the same as having a hedge fund and having an exchange at the same time. That's what you're suggesting is happening in the healthcare industry, where you've got two separate businesses that have an interdependence and a reliance, and then you create the wrong incentive structure to get people hooked on Special K instead of using ketamine therapy.
Wait, I have two questions.
I wonder who you're referring to, Nicholas.
Two questions is, ketamine essentially can be produced by laymen in their bathtubs, for lack of a better word, somewhat metaphorically, although barely, I assume. I've never made it, but that therein lies the problem, because is it, and maybe Heyman might be good to answer this, or Dr. Danish, Heyman being in Canada, is this uniquely a U.S. thing, this ketamine prescribing and whatnot? And B, how do we feel about the fact that a very useful chemical is not owned by a company and is essentially open sourced pharmaceuticals, which you could put cannabis in that category too.
Is it called generics?
Yeah,
no.
I mean, it's more than generics, because my cousin can make it in his bathroom.
Yeah, it's one thing I was going to mention is we have actually an expert in the audience. This is the beauty of Twitter, by the way. Olu. Olu's actually a professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, and he is focused on this space specifically. So he has a lot of expertise. But his last name is Aguilar. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I'm trying to ask him to raise his hand. It's easier.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Olu, please raise your hand. But what I was going to say, You can also make meth in your bathtub or somewhere. There's an entire show about it, right? So I think we have to be very careful about conflating those two. But that's a fair question. I think self-serve medications is probably a bad idea.
No,
But I'll
yeah,
let Heyman jump in.
my point is the fact that it is open source almost works against itself in being adopted by the medical machinery as it is, because the way the system is set up, and I readily admit and concede to the point that I sound like a cuckoo conspiracy theorist here, but doesn't Purdue have disproportionate influence on, and I'm giving that as the example with, for example, the opiate epidemic that they, and to some degree, might be responsible for, where what if ketamine was a Purdue pharmaceutical product? You would see more people using ketamine than the fact that it's open sourced, and I think that's the appropriate way to think of how there's no intellectual property around ketamine. It's truly makeable by anyone who seeks out how to make it. So does that work against itself, even if it is incredibly useful, kind of the opposite of the opioid epidemic? I don't know that you could have a ketamine or a psychedelic epidemic because they don't have the same addictive qualities. But is it
Although it's unsafe.
that there's the ketamine, because it's not there's no intellectual property or owner of it, you won't get the same kickback incentive structure that was built into the opioid epidemic that was largely predicated on a kickback system. Is that not a fair?
I mean, if you can't patent and make money on it, I think Olu can answer this better than I can. But Olu, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you sound great.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple things. One is you have a good point, Tyler, in terms of how easy it is to get generic ketamine, and so a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are actually working on synthetic versions or metabolites of ketamine that they can develop some IP around. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that a lot of these psychedelic medications don't work great in isolation, and they're best administered within the context of some kind of therapy. So if you're just sort of making, DIY ketamine and using it yourself, I mean, I don't know if you'll get the same therapeutic benefits as if you would get it in a more controlled clinical environment where you're getting the appropriate adjunctive therapy alongside of it. So those are just a couple of points.
And why is it?
They're pretty old, aren't they? I mean, like the ketamine's been around forever, and there's, it's sort of like saying, that we stopped after generation 1 of ACE inhibitors. You know what I mean? Like, it's like so old. Are there people working on new versions of this?
Yeah. So one is like people have looked at metabolites of ketamine, like hydroxynorketamine, which some people feel has sort of a cleaner mechanism of action. And then, of course, people are looking at synthetic versions of psilocybin for use in depression as well as substance use disorders. So I mean, ketamine, as you said, has been around for a long time, but I don't think it's necessarily the best of the psychedelics out there. We have a lot of people that take the prescription version of ketamine, which is called esketamine. The brand name is Spravato, made by Johnson & Johnson. And, it hasn't gotten a lot of great uptake. Part of it is because it has to be administered in a doctor's office, 2 to 3 times a week for several weeks. And then it's hard to wean people off of it if they do have a good clinical response. And so there's a lot of debate in the literature and in our field about how long should people stay on these medications. Is the long-term use of ketamine safe? We have some data from recreational use of ketamine that it's associated with bladder issues, but we don't know if that's going to be the same with the prescription version of ketamine or the ketamine that people are using therapeutically.
And why, Danish, is NMN lumped into all of this? It's not at all the same kind of drug.
So I think that the point that was being made was specifically around taking something that is out there that has some data around being beneficial and then making a version of it that's patented and then using that to negate the opportunity for people to get it for. I mean, that's kind of what Tyler was also mentioning, which is that ultimately there's two things, Tyler. One is you make it in your basement or you make it in your bathtub, and the other is it's a generic medicine that's available for everybody at a cheap cost, and then you change it slightly and you use that to say, hey, no, 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 these are all now infringing my old patents, and then making it impossible for people to get access to. I think that's what Nicholas was referring to with the NMN conversation. But I think there's with ketamine and specifically esketamine, which is what we give in the hospital, but and also now they give it in clinics. There's actually a ton of ketamine clinics out there. I think they're being lumped together because it's talking about how the pharmaceutical industry can use lobbying and misinformation to push back on potential opportunities to use medications that are out there that are safe and effective. What I would push back at is it can be a both and, right? It can be both that these are safe and effective when used in the right model, maybe within a therapeutic regimen, without having to go and try to cut all the opportunity out. I mean, it's a tough question to answer because, like Tyler said, no one's hands are, you want to blame it on Purdue, and I appreciate that, Tyler. But there were a lot of doctors prescribing those opiates. So we're not all free of blame here, and ultimately, it's really hard for people like me. I know Olu probably is a much more experienced person in this, but it's really, really hard for us to figure out whether are we buying into the narrative that's out there around, hey, this is dangerous, this is unsafe, this is whatever, when we've been using something for 30 years and we know exactly what dosages work. And we're giving it to like everybody from older adults to little kids. I mean, Olu, it's very safe, correct? I mean, you mentioned it's hard to wean people off. I know that Special K can be addictive, correct? I mean, that's my understanding, at least. And so these are
Yeah,
pretty safe medicines.
How is that
it's
different from
relatively
any
safe,
other
but
antidepressant?
I think the part of the issue is how it's currently administered. I think if it was an oral medication, and people can make their own oral versions of ketamine. I think it would be a lot easier, but they are relatively safe. But then there are a lot of folks that believe that if you look at the mechanism of action of ketamine, that it works through the opioid system, and that if you use naltrexone, which blocks opioid activity in the brain, that you lose the antidepressant efficacy of ketamine. And so some people are concerned that ketamine is just basically a couple steps removed from those opioids that were referred to when talking about Purdue. And so there's a lot of people that feel that we don't know yet what some of the long-term consequences may be of extended ketamine use.
I think that just to add just a fine point on that. So Francine, it's exactly what Danish was saying was what I was saying. So there is in every single thing that we do, we have to acknowledge that the most successful pharmaceuticals are also coming from natural, natural products from the natural world. And in those situations, every time someone gets a patent, it becomes an expensive product because you have all the regulatory FDA, et cetera, layers onto them. And that's in order to keep us safe. And so I think this is always about safety and the illusion of safety when people take drugs. But as you rightly say, you can become addicted and you can overdose on the most simple over-the-counter drugs if taken the wrong way. So with all of these things, I think you could say the same with cannabis. The only thing that happened with cannabis in America was that it became more expensive, and a generation of people got put in prison for using a natural substance.
Well, in Canada, what happened when you had telehealth for cannabis, I think a lot more people got access to cannabis under the supervision of a physician, which I think is kind of critical here. And given the kind of labor shortages the medical industry is itself experiencing right now, I think this helps potentially fill gaps that would otherwise have people try to make it in their bathtub, right? So I think that's a good alternative.
Yeah, and I think sorry I missed some of Dr. Olu's information there, but ketamine is legal in Canada under medical. So cannabis and ketamine are the two substances that are in class one that are still allowed to be prescribed. And Dr. Olu, I think you may have alluded to it, but it just yeah, here there are clinics in Canada that actually provide it more for the depression, and it's more in the anxiety depression area. Pain is also a big area. But at this stage, I mean, we know from the opioid crisis as well, it's everyone's at fault because the information was the problem. We relied too much on the farm industry or certain particular researchers to, just like what happened with the pandemic and stuff. We relied too heavily on single sources of information. And that's what happened with the whole dispensing, because everyone's looking for the easy way out. And unfortunately, governments also failed in terms of writing the proper documentation. They relied on the industry experts. So I think going forward, information is the key. Providing information. It doesn't matter. Even with marijuana, it's like even now, even after marijuana has been legalized for so long, doctors don't know how to prescribe it still, because we haven't been given like the basic guidelines.
He may muted himself.
I think we lost him in the end.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll circle back. We'll go to the next topic then. A look at this Financial Times. It says a look at the impact of the funding crunch on India's tech startups, which raised about $25 billion in 2022, which was down 35% from the previous year. Funding crunch has triggered mass job cuts of up to 25,000 at India's once thriving tech companies. Yeah, 2021, as you might recall here in Tech News, we were reading headlines almost daily about new unicorns in India at an insane pace. I recall 50 new unicorns that year, one per week, basically. And then and I was set to move over. I was going to have my first event in January 18 or 28, something like that. And then COVID, Delta came in, and that was the end of that. And but they did go on to have a respectable year with $25 billion. That's incredible. And I still think India's very much going to play a very important role in the future of startups. The next is Wall Street Journal. It says a look at the rise and fall of Alameda Research, whose troubles began well before the crypto crash, as the firm took big gambles, winning some and losing plenty. And that's at the core of that whole drama, was the losing bets of Alameda, which is now we're reading follow-on second-order effects headlines like the top story today about how the Winklevoss's Gemini had a bunch of money in FTX, and as a result are now not able to facilitate all the withdrawals and everything. And it's a dominoes, as I think Robert said. Next up from The Verge, Verizon, which is an American mobile company, decommissions its 3G network a couple days ago on December 31st, the last major carrier to do so after AT&T and T-Mobile turned off their services in February and March. And the significance of that, you might be thinking, who gives a shit about turning off 3G? But there are some technologies that were made during 3G that were built to work on 3G, which don't work on 4G or 5G. And so now some of those technologies need to get upgraded. And some of them are somewhat important digital infrastructure type things, but I'm sure they'll get upgraded
Yeah,
now.
I actually have one of those things on my car, like the press for emergencies, that was on AT&T 3G, so it doesn't work anymore. I could upgrade it, but I haven't done it.
The next is from Financial Times. Experts weigh in on Meta's, aka Facebook's, decision to whether to lift Donald Trump's Facebook and Instagram bans. A source says the announcement will be made after January 7th. is it a coincidence that Twitter is also now clearly willing to lift the ban? I think even Elon Musk was inviting, to put it lightly, Donald Trump back onto Twitter. And now is that in any way related to the fact that Facebook is now debating this issue? And are both of these in any way related to the issue that Trump might be running? Do we know yet if
He's an announced candidate. That's the number one reason I think Facebook's considering it, because
he has
it's
announced?
much. He
Yeah.
did. He announced right after the November elections, and I think that's the dilemma for them, is that it's a much different issue when you have an announced presidential candidate who right now is considered the front runner for the Republican nomination. So that's the politics of it. Yeah.
Right. So if you unpack that a little bit, if he does become the candidate for the GOP, I know that's a big if, but it's a realistic if. So it's worth contemplating. And if that happens, then he does have a chance of winning, as he did last time. He lost the last one, but the one before that. But we're talking by incredibly thin margins, by the way. So,
but the real thing is he become the Republican nominee, whether he wins the general election or not. The newsworthiness is going to be whether if he's a Republican nominee. And by the way, just
I know, no. The bigger question that this headline is begging is it a coincidence that they're contemplating reinstating his account at a time when he's now back in the political race in the horse race metaphor? And if there is an opportunity that he could win, and I think even his strongest haters would concede that there is a universe in which he conceivably could win, what happens to Facebook or any platform who doesn't allow him to have access on the platforms if he wins? Knowing how incredibly vindictive he has a rich history of being, kind of a vindictive kind of dude, what might happen to Facebook if they continue to ban him and he's the president again? And secondly, this whole issue around needing to give equal airtime. I know this is a legacy media concept, but there is a concept in the US that political candidates need to be given equal airtime. And in the very literal sense, we don't even watch TV anymore. We're watching things online, which doesn't apply to airtime anymore. But there was a time when there was only 3 channels, and those 3 channels had to be careful about giving equal airtime to political candidates. So if the platforms are allowing some candidates to be on their platforms and not others, people could very strongly argue that these platforms are influencing the democratic process.
That was the argument of the investigation, where Russian influence was sought and seen. So, they know it's a fact. I mean, I think, your question of whether the GOP will award the nomination to him is the real question. If it does nominate him, I think you have to, because you're not going to want to have a platform that doesn't include the candidate.
Okay.
Sorry.
I want to make a point, because this come up in other rooms, just so people, particularly not only Americans, but people who are not here, not Americans, understand. The Republicans use a different primary process to select their nominee than the Democrats. And this really matters for Trump's chances of getting the Republican nomination. The Democrats use a proportional.
What's going on?
You lost me
Cheryl,
also?
is it just me, or did we lose Nicholas and Ken?
I can hear Ken.
I
You're on stage.
No, it's you, Tyler. We can hear Ken. I can hear Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you. So let me while he's so what I wanted to say is the Republicans use a process.
I think it is me. I'm going to change Wi-Fi networks. But let me read.
Okay.
Let me read the next article.
Yeah. So Tyler,
I just finished my statement, Tyler.
You drop down into the audience.
Yep.
Hold on,
and then tech news, and then Cheryl brings you back up. That'll fix it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So
do that.
Tyler, what I want to just very quickly finish, if you could.
Let me try
The,
reading the next article and tell me how.
He can't hear you, Ken. He can't hear you,
Yeah,
Ken. So let
It's
him
okay.
let him read
Ken,
it.
Tyler can't hear you,
I
mate.
just removed him, and then you can continue first. I'll bring him back up.
Yeah, so Ken, when Tyler can't hear you, he can't hear you, so that's why he kept interrupting.
got it now. Okay.
Can you
Should
hear
I?
me now?
Do you want me to wait for him or just finish it? Well, because,
Speak
Can you
speak
hear
now
me?
because he's in.
that's good idea. So yeah, what I was about to say, the Democrats use a proportional representation process. So as you go state by state, if you're a candidate and you get 20% of the vote in California and somebody else gets 30%, you still roughly get 20% of the delegates. In the Republican system, it's winner take all. Okay, and in a multi-candidate race, which seems to be shaping up on the Republican side, so if you get DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence and maybe the governor of Governor Hogan from Maryland, whatever. Someone's got an open mic, but he can win the nomination with a polarity, even though maybe a vast majority of Republicans don't want him to be the nominee. If you look at 2016, is almost what happened. He had a polarity. He's a polarity candidate, but he has a core base of supporters that probably constitute 35% of the Republican electorate. So there's a multi-candidate race. There's a high probability that he can get the nomination. There was some Republican fundraiser who I know well, by the way, who was saying that the big money is starting to move away from him. And the point I kept making to her, he doesn't need to raise that much money to win the Republican nomination. He just needs enough money for ballot access in 50 states, okay? Because everyone knows who he is. And if he gets that and you have a multi-candidate race, he is likely to be the nominee, other than if he gets indicted or something. That's a whole different issue. But just the math of that. And I just wanted to point it out, the math of that, because a lot of people don't realize this winner take all situation. You get the most votes in California, even though it's vastly less than the majority, you get all the delegates, almost like the Electoral
That's how he
College.
won
Thanks.
last time. He
That's exactly what I said. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, could I just add a technical thing about Twitter Spaces? So far, I've been kicked off twice because I've gotten a phone call or been in the matrix. And each time I get kicked off for that, I have to start again going into the room and bothering Cheryl to bring me up. And then when she says she requests me to be a speaker, I can't accept that. There's no place for me to accept that. I have to request it. So we should be making a list of features we need from Twitter Spaces to keep this room here.
By the way, can you hear me?
Well, I mean, I've been hosting a lot of rooms. If you take a phone call, that's you're just going to have to deal with that. That's a standard part of the app.
We have a request list.
Accept the request is you can do that. Cheryl invited me, and it came down as a drop down from the top of the screen, and I just clicked accept. So you shouldn't have a problem with that. And as for the boring Cheryl, but that's the point of the host, unfortunately. So that's where Cheryl does the back end and Tyler does the front end.
I know, but
That's sort of
but
the two.
but Twitter is going to release new features at the end of January, Piotr, and we might as well ask for these features while they're releasing them. Because yes,
But you being on the phone is not a feature. That's just how the app works. That's not a feature that you can stop.
Well, so really simple point. I mean, the way that Clubhouse works shows what's technically possible. So it's not like we're asking
exactly,
for something that's impossible.
exactly.
Yeah, but you're talking about features on an add-on, whilst Clubhouse is specifically designed for social audio. So Twitter Spaces is never going to be as comprehensively capable as Twitter Spaces.
But it's still a good
You
idea
don't
to
know that.
recommend.
It's still a good idea to recommend the features.
It never hurts to recommend. Hey, back to the
Elon?
article that Tyler posted and Ken spoke on. Even if it wasn't Trump, he's sitting on. He raised over $250 million last year for his Stop the Steal initiative. I know people are talking about fair time, things like that. Just follow the money, guys. I mean, if he was able to raise $250 million and supposedly in trouble and being investigated, know what else he can raise, and what these companies are looking for, especially as their ad revenues are going down. You don't want to miss a U.S. campaign ad funding out there. So it's as much of money as giving him fair time too, and that's with any candidate.
He's definitely got the money, and as Ken rightly says, because it's a first past the post system, and he's got 35% of the base. The real, for those who are, watching, the real question is only what Mitch is going to do with the rest of the party. Surely, Ken, or anyone else who's familiar. What is the process the Republicans have to go through? The leadership, the GOP,
Well,
I should say.
so on the nomination side, quite frankly, the Senate majority leader typically, or minority leader, whatever he's going to be, minority leader, I guess, Republican leader, or the House leaders, it's really not up to them. It's whoever controls the RNC. And that's a very interesting thing that no one's focused on. Typically, the RNC is controlled by the either incumbent or outgoing president, because, so the question is how many adherents are still on the Republican National Committee leadership. That the head of the RNC, interestingly, is Mitt Romney's sister. Okay, but it's not just her. So it just require you have to go look at the leadership there. And I haven't.
That would
heard
be
any...
interesting. That would be interesting to understand that more, Ken. If
Oh,
you,
of course,
if
yeah.
you
No one's
have
focusing
that
on
information.
that. Yeah, the membership, and these are usually people you've never heard of. If you remember this guy, I think his name is Lance something. Priebus, the guy who was
His name was Reince Priebus. He's now in the military.
Oh, Reince, yeah, right, and he was Trump's first chief of staff, but before that, he was very active, if not the head of the RNC when for Trump's first campaign. So yeah, that's what you have to look at, and there hasn't been a lot of stories on that, whether something's going to change there. If in fact there's a backlash against him, then the RNC should change their rules to make it look more like a Democratic primary, and then he can't win as a polarity candidate. That would be the biggest tell.
Hey guys, just a time out for a second. I just want to, there's some technical issues going on in Tech Spaces, so I'm just going to actually just do some musical chairs here. I'm going to bring all of you back on stage again, but I'm just going to do some musical chairs to figure this out, all right? So just continue the conversation. Sorry, Ken.
Should we step off? Do you want?
Yeah, I can just step
go
off
the stage. You want us to step off, Heyman?
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes,
we
we
can
can.
hear you.
Yeah, Heyman, you don't need to remove
Finally.
everyone,
Okay,
mate. That's
great.
not going to fix the problem. It's only the people who can't hear Cheryl, the co-hosts, need to move down. You don't need to
you can hear
musical
me now,
chairs.
right?
That's not going to
Yeah,
fix
we
it.
can hear you.
Okay, the problem is Tyler can't get in for some reason.
So that's what I'm going to actually.
So we'll try to get him in, get him in now. In the meantime, Heyman, just do what you wish to do.
I'll do that.
Yep. Please continue the conversation.
So for
I
those,
have a list of the stories. I can go through the next story if we want to go.
Yes, please, Ken, go ahead.
Okay, so let me see where he left off, and I may even go slightly out of order. Oh yeah, here's the next one. Google agrees to pay $29.5 million to settle lawsuits with Washington, D.C. and Indiana over its location tracking practices after paying nearly $392 million to 40 states. And then the next one after that is, unless somebody wants to comment on that one, is Grubhub agrees to pay $3.5 million to settle a lawsuit filed by the District of Columbia for illegally charging hidden fees and using deceptive marketing techniques. I haven't read that article, but my perceptions that's going to be a number of localities have tried to limit the fees that they charge the food delivery services, and then the food delivery services.
It's another case of show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes per Charlie Munger, which could have applied to our discussion around the pharmaceutical ketamine scenario. It's all about incentives. But on that, the previous story with the Google fine, what was that exactly for, Ken?
Do you want to just?
It was to settle lawsuits with Washington. Hold on, I'm bringing it up. For, with Washington D.C. and Indiana of its location tracking practices. Under the settlements, Google agreed to not make misrepresentations to users about an individual user's location information in location history and web.
So Ken, what we can gather from that, because you moved over it quite quickly, is that there was a case settled between a state. You suggesting it was legislation at the state level?
No, it was a settlement. Like the attorney generals of those localities were sued, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's AG Rhoda in Indiana.
Okay.
So they already paid $400 million to 40 other states on a similar issue.
I mean, AG Rokita.
Okay, but this is. But the misrepresentation that we're talking about here is that they tell their users that they're not tracking them, but the case that the state took with Google was that in fact they were being disingenuous when they really were fully aware of the location of those individuals.
Right. I mean, what it says, they built detailed user profiles and target ads, but misled users about its practices.
So this is worthwhile. So this is a worthwhile highlighting, is that Google and all of the technocracy, Apple, etc., Microsoft, all talk about the fact that they don't have, privately identifiable information about their users. But you see in the wording of that, they're talking about profile. And this is what we've always been trying to draw the attention of listeners to, is that your individual information is less valuable than your profile information relative to you in a cohort of other individuals, especially when you're using AI, because the group data, the group fitness gives you much more valuable information to your advertisers than necessarily the individual data. And so this, is a meaningful piece of action on behalf of the states, but it is clear that you just have to pay your money and takes your choice, because that business model isn't changing. So the question that comes to me for anyone in this room that wants to proffer an answer is, given that Google and all of these guys, they just get their fine and they pay their fine and on we go, is there any limit to what happens here, or any way that we can see a protection coming in that would be similar to, say, the European experience? Anyone have a view on that?
Well, I think the difference is, I think the European Union functions differently than we function in the United States, right? You probably would need some sort of federal legislation, as opposed to everything being, state by state. But do we want me to move on, or are we done with that one or not?
Are we done with this discussion? Okay, unfortunately, Tyler is not able to rejoin, but he wants us to carry on. So, because just now I have some technical issue. Where did he stop on the tech article? What is the last article?
He stopped on.
Yeah.
He
was doing. Okay, where he stopped. Let me go back.
He stopped on the social media topic on adding Trump back, and then he because he couldn't hear anybody.
Meta's decision,
yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Got it.
So Cheryl, do you have the list, or I have to go bring it back up again?
She has the list. She always has
I have the list. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is Google agrees to pay $29.5 million to settle lawsuits with Washington D.C. and India.
Right. We just did that.
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
AG.
Okay. Sorry.
And it's a small amount of money, isn't it?
Yeah.
26 million.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a procedural thing. We'll see what it builds on.
But it's only one state plus DC. That's why, remember, there was $400 million that they settled with 40 other states. These two entities probably opted out of that settlement and did their own. That's why.
Yeah, but look at what I'm trying to say is, look at the size of the fines. Even if it's 400 million, and look at the size of the revenue line on a company like that. It's just such a cost of doing business, and you just don't see any action to really clamp this down.
You also have to look at the political side of it. And the AG from Indiana is a climber, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, but at least he can put a feather in his hat and said, look what I've won. And he's collecting some wins right now.
And by the way, Nicholas, there's a flip side to these issues. What Robert just mentioned, you talk about incentives. one of the problems with having elected attorney generals and elected district attorneys is they have incentives sometimes to bring cases they shouldn't bring because they're elected and looking for votes, and headlines, and so that's a different type of conflict.
Agree.
Oh, it's good. Okay, moving along. From New York Times, employment in tech occupations grew 12% year on year to a record 6.39 million in November 2022 as workers eyed banking, retail, healthcare, and manufacturing amid tech layoffs. 12%. That's
See,
good.
exactly what I was saying. Even though the tech industry is doing it, the old brick and mortar or the old blue chip companies and others, GE, you name it, they still need them. They're going to absorb the talent that these guys got.
Cheryl, can you kick me? We're just going to do a test. Thanks.
Quick, who?
Just kick me. We're going to do a test.
Tyler
to
is
see
back.
It's Eric.
Tyler is
Eric
back.
said to do that.
Oh, Tyler, I miss you. No, Tyler is back.
There you go. Eric doesn't have to go now. Stay.
Tyler's back in it. He had to hard reset the app. Sometimes you have to do that, clear your cache, hard reset.
Yeah.
And it
Tyler,
just
you're
fixes
back?
the problem.
Yep. And I'm going to step down once he comes.
Blocking doesn't have the same impact as it does in Clubhouse, so you will still be able to be in a space.
Tyler, are you
Block
back?
you.
Cheryl, bear in mind there's also a much bigger delay on spaces between the audience and stage. So when somebody's in transit, it's several seconds compared to Clubhouse.
Yeah, you
between
lose
audience and
the
stage.
you lose the narrative.
Well, let's see if Tyler can speak. So let's pause.
Hold on. I think from what I can see, he's already a speaker. But Tyler, can you try to speak? Can you mute yourself and unmute
No,
yourself
he's still
again?
connecting, actually, right now.
Yeah, so for me, it shows he's still connecting. So this is another problem, which is time lag difference between people connecting and those who actually are on
Like
stage.
the 90 modem sound connecting. Let's just play that in the background while he connects.
It's actually quite a good illustration of, just by the by, of how distributed systems work and why distributed systems are important to coordinate, because we're all in different places and because all of these are trying to catch up with each other, we're all seeing something slightly different, which is why it is hard to build a low latency app, and it's hard to reverse engineer something into another application to the point about adding features and functionality, which I think is a good idea to suggest, but it's very difficult to do. Here he is.
Tyler's up.
Yeah,
Tyler.
I'm back.
Oh, finally! Welcome
Okay,
back.
you can relax. Just boot Eric out of the room so we can see if that's the issue.
And I'll step down.
I think it's that Ken guy. He's a bit of a dodgy one.
No worries. No,
Cheryl?
it's actually very, very glitchy.
Cheryl,
So
kick Eric out of the room.
I've got it.
No, it has to be a host. Oh, you are a co-host. Great.
So I'll step down.
No,
And Cal's here too. So
no worries. Yeah. Oh, you can only have 3. Get Cal up here.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to step down.
Okay. And then Cheryl, if you can invite Cal up. Are we doing?
Yes.
Did we finish the headlines and we're doing the tweets?
not yet, because they were having some discussion just now.
Okay.
But Tyler, to be fair, I don't think it's Eric because he has been on stage all along.
No.
And he was on stage when you're on stage.
The point is, by kicking a speaker out of the room, it blocks them from re-entering the room. The space is no longer available to join if they've been kicked out of the room.
So what you're saying, Tyler, is that if you use the process of kicking out, you can't get back in. So you have to get the person to step down by pressing leave at the top of the screen. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure. We'll figure it out over time.
Tyler,
well, you can ask the person to switch to listening, right?
Yeah.
They click on their icon.
They should just close their own app and restart their app. That's when things get funky, like it did for me. So, were you reading the Google lawsuit one or the Grubhub?
Yes,
yeah.
We did.
We did Google, we did Grubhub, and then Cheryl moved on. I think Cheryl may have skipped one, by the way.
That's right.
Because we didn't discuss that. We didn't discuss the Grubhub one, which I think is interesting again because I think that's another one where the supply chain, you get the restaurants are being destroyed.
Okay. Grubhub agrees to pay $3.5 million to settle a lawsuit in D.C. for illegally charging hidden fees and using deceptive marketing tactics. The DC.
Just more bad behavior by setting incentives for these delivery services, which don't, have a good economic business model and are actually worse for the restaurant.
The DC Attorney General office also accused Grubhub.
Deliver bad service because it's usually cold.
I hope my mic's working. And welcome back, Cal.
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The DC Attorney General's office accused Grubhub of listing 1,000 restaurants in DC without their permission by using numbers to reroute to Grubhub workers or creating websites without the eatery's consent. A previous report said that Grubhub had already ended those practices. There you go.
So Cheryl, I think you may have skipped this one because Cheryl had moved on to this article about employment in tech operations, occupations grew 12%. But I'm looking at one, I think that was ahead of it actually, which is probably more interesting, that a judge sets the first pretrial hearing in the FTC case against Microsoft's bid to take over Activision for tomorrow. So the first pretrial hearing is going to be tomorrow on that case.
Okay. Leaked copies of big movies tend to surface at year's end, but didn't this year in 2022, probably due to more security streaming and shorter release windows. That reminds me to turn things to Jonathan briefly, because Jonathan said he sent me a DM about an interesting development. Jonathan, you want to share that briefly?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So for the past year, I've been working on reports and reviewing the science put out by Citizen Lab and Amnesty International about spyware around the world. And just recently, actually last 2 weeks, Citizen Lab has finally admitted that they made a mistake in their reports, and that a member of European Parliament was not actually spied on, and that has become a really big issue. This member of European Parliament has given testimony to the espionage and is included in a human rights abuse report, a 56-page report. So this really brings about the question about the integrity of the data that has been delivered to the world and the methodologies at which the Citizen Lab and Amnesty International are performing these tests and these validations. This is a really big issue for the tech industry right now because, as we all know, spyware is it's the hot topic, right? You're being spied on, you're being watched, you're being, all your information is being gathered. And this, in my research, is not the case. I found this to not be the case with spyware as we know it. So yeah, that's my piece.
Very cool. Thank you for that. The next is
actually can you go into a little more detail on what the problem, what the discrepancy was with Citizen Lab's analysis?
Sure. So this is very interesting. So the forensics report that they released, their researchers messed up the names of a member of European Parliament and then an unknown another person. So how they're actually classifying each case is by first initial and last name and initial. It's just very unorganized, and so the data of the people that are said to be infected with Pegasus spyware has been compromised in such that 11 people have the same first and last initials in a list of 65. So this is where we start to really look at the data integrity and how do we know that this person is actually infected when you've already made the mistake of misidentifying someone with the first initial and last initial. So this is going to be raised on the 9th by members of European Parliament. We'll be hearing more about this on the 9th of this month.
Okay, next up. from Wired, a look at last year's worst breaches, leaks, ransomware attacks, state-sponsored hacking campaigns, and digital takeovers, including at least 2 Twilio breaches. And last but not least, on the big headlines today, Washington Post says they have sources that Facebook/Meta is struggling to move hardware manufacturing out of China. After abandoning its smartwatch plans, the company is still working on a wrist wearable. And that the interesting bit there is that it implies that Facebook is trying to get out of China, and the question is, why is Facebook trying to get out of China? And it's obvious that it's related to the fact that Apple is getting out of China, as we have been reading every few days for the past many weeks. And why is it then? We have a sense for why Apple's de-risking, as Cal very cogently coined it, but why is Apple and Meta? And is it a coincidence that they're both Americans and that they're simultaneously working to get out of Apple? Then Ben tells me Apple isn't getting out of China. I would beg to differ, Ben, but can Ben, if you can raise your hand, and I would love to hear your point of view on this, because we've read.
He's on stage. I see him.
Not our regular Ben. There's another friend of mine named Ben Katz who's in the audience.
Yes.
There's also David in the audience, David Chang. I just saw him. I've invited
David
him
might know. Oh my goodness, Cal, good eye.
Invited. He might not be able to come up, but I've invited him up.
David, get up. No, I think he can. We still have enough space on stage.
Yeah, I'll invite David as well. It would be great to hear David. And by the way, David, last time I heard David was in person in his hotel room in Bangkok, and we had a fun late night. We both happened to be we were both in quarantine in Bangkok at the same time, and we did
So Tyler, Cheryl is going to get a real rise out of this, but I'm actually moving to Singapore.
Oh, nice.
When are you coming? When are you coming?
I already got a place there, so I'm officially moving over end of Feb.
Okay, I'll try to be here until you come. Okay.
Oh, you're in
Singapore?
Singapore?
China me. Yeah, I'm in Singapore now. Yes.
Okay, I'll be there. I'll be there on the 16th.
Fantastic. Okay, send me back.
David, I thought all the smart people from China were moving to Singapore. How come this is happening with you?
He's one of them. The smart and the rich.
No.
Which category he belongs to.
No.
And they have data centers here, remember?
Hang on, but do they have unofficial Chinese police stations in Singapore?
I'm in Hong Kong at the moment, guys. Come on, give me a break.
He got a great laugh.
I know, no such thing.
He's got a belly laugh. It's funny.
Yeah, he does. Okay, so Ben Katz is a fleshy friend of mine from Santa Monica, multi-serial entrepreneur, one of the whiz-bang Facebook marketers due to one of his startups that he did, Card.com. Ben, can you remind me how many Facebook campaigns you were running concurrently at the same time as part of Card?
I don't remember, but I definitely predicted Cambridge Analytica could happen years ahead of it.
As a result of your expertise, Facebook obviously must have been giving you like the red carpet, white glove concierge service based on the amount of ads you were running on Facebook.
Yeah, 2006,